Hello. In the Crown of Aragon, 639 years ago, it was February 11th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today's episode is another development in a case that we've been tracing since day one of this podcast. So this episode is about the sexual assault that took place in Montpellier. And I decided to keep the usual jaunty opening music today because I'm not going into details about the case itself. What we're looking at here is the effort to have the perpetrators, the rapists, get away with it. And so I was kind of on the fence. I was like, whenever I am talking about this, I just don't like the jaunty, upbeat opening music that is the music for this season. But in this case, because we're not going to be going into detail about the crime itself, I felt like it's appropriate still to have the usual opening music. But it's something that I think about, and there's going to be other instances where a document is going to be discussing some cruelty, some really awful things that have happened to people, and I will make that judgment call about, I don't think that, upbeat, happy music is the right tone to set for the topic. Today's document is a continuation of the effort on the part of the powerful allies of the rapists to get them released from jail in Montpellier. And I just want to note here that it's been 48 days since the letter from Violant on December 25th, New Year's Day, ordering the officials in Montpellier to release these students. I've learned a little bit about the case since then, so there's a lot to say in today's episode. And then also there's a very detailed examination of a phrase in Latin that I'm going to want to share with you. And it'll help you understand why Latin can be so difficult. First of all, I want to situate the document itself. And actually, today we're talking about 3 documents. On February 11th, Violant wrote 3 letters. The first one is in Catalan. It's addressed to the officials of Montpellier. The second one is addressed to the Bishop of Maguelone, which I think is the ecclesiastical authority for the region around Montpellier. And then the third is addressed to a set of officials that are somehow part of the administration, the ecclesiastical administration of the bishopric of Maguelone. So it's a little bit difficult to figure out why 2 Latin letters are necessary here. but and they're sort of similar, and then there's some interesting slight differences between the two Latin letters. One going to the bishop himself, it seems, and then the other going to the set of administrators that might be involved in ecclesiastical justice in that institution of the Cathedral of Maguelone. All right, these are in the secret seal register, and there's some interesting differences at the end of each letter in the way that the type of seal is described. And in the Catalan letter, it's listed as Segel Secret Accostement. In the first Latin letter to the bishop himself, in Latin, Sigillo Secreto Assueto. And then in the second Latin letter, Siguello what does that say? Solito Secreto. I don't exactly know the differences between these and what might, maybe the first and second one are the same, but I'm still trying to figure that out. But I did want to note that that we've got slightly different descriptions of the seal level. And now we can move on to the content of the letters. And remember, the accused rapists have been in the criminal justice system of Montpellier for 48 days. And I think they've been in jail for 48 days because the first letter that we have in this set of three, the one in Catalan, Violant is asking the officials of Montpellier to release them, and it sounds like release them from imprisonment. So what I really like about this is that Violant is not successful, that Joan was not successful, and that maybe the Duc de Berry, who's effectively the ruler of France right now, looked at this situation and said, maybe not. Maybe I'm not going to lift a finger to help these accused rapists. Maybe he did, but it's really difficult for me to figure out how you've got these extremely politically powerful figures who are using their influence to get these accused rapists released from jail, and they have not been successful. It's kind of a major point in favor of these officials of Montpellier. I mean, I don't know what kind of level of pressure they feel when they're getting instructions from the king and queen of the Crown of Aragon and the Duc de Berry, the most powerful person in France, to release these accused rapists, and then they're like, no, we're not doing it. And it's almost 50 days that they're defying these pressure campaigns. So it's really a very interesting development to see that almost 50 days later, the officials of Montpellier are insisting on a criminal justice process for these students. I also have, in the meantime, found out that Ramon de Soler is a very high up person in the treasury for Joan and Violant. I think that when Violant was the Duchess of Girona, Ramon de Soler was her treasurer, her top treasurer. Not super sure about that one, but he is high up in the financial administration of the government of the Crown of Aragon. we see the name Ramon de Soler in these letters because I'm pretty sure that we're talking about the son of that treasury figure. So it's like Ramon de Soler Jr. is a law student in Montpellier, and it's him, and it seems like a singular friend. So it seems like there's two people, which is a new detail. It was vague in the letters from a month-ish ago, and so now we've got specifically in the third line of Violant's Catalan letter to Montpellier officials. In the third line, it very clearly says one of his companions. So we don't have the name of this friend of Ramon de Soler Jr., but it seems like we're talking about two students who were the rapists in this situation. So as I'm looking at these letters, there were a couple difficult terms that I had to engage with. One of them was in the Catalan letter. I'm just going to, if you're interested in the details of that one, I'm going to point you to the transcript that I'm going to put onto the webpage for this document, because the beginning of my work with ChatGPT was working on that one Catalan term, figured out it's a descriptor for Ramon de Soler Jr. and his studies, that it just kind of confirms that he's a student at the law school in Montpellier. If you're interested in the details on that, you can look at the transcript of my conversation with ChatGPT. I wanted to focus on a Latin phrase, and in this Latin phrase, which is on the fourth line of the second Latin letter, so it's on folio F82V, the students are being described, and the situation is being introduced. So the line, well, I'll just read out the whole sentence in Latin. It actually begins at the very end of the second line. Super instancia per consules a, and then I've got a word that I don't quite know how to expand, like nunolorums singulares, and then vile montem pesulare, that's Montpellier, veca pridie contra eos oconem non lorem delictore. And some of that is wrong, because I think it's occasione. I'm pretty sure that it's the last three words that are really sticking with me. So we have contra eos before the last three words of the sentence. So against them. So there's been a prosecution against them. That's, I think, what's being described, that the consuls, the people in charge of Montpellier, have been carrying out some kind of criminal justice against them. And the three words that follow, I think I spent like an hour and a half on those three words, because I just wasn't sure about the first of the three, which reads Occone with a macron. I'm pretty sure now that that's occasione. Occasion is the English cognate. And then the middle word, I was thinking possibly it started with NOU, but eventually I got to being pretty sure that it starts with NON, and that it stands for non lorem. And the third word is pretty clear, but there was that long trail off of the E at the end, which made me think maybe there's an M being added there. But then what I came to after a while was that since there's what looks like a period underneath the long upward trail of the end of the E, that it's actually the sort of slash, like the punctuation, that's sort of like a comma and indicating the end of a phrase. And before the word that I think is occasione, there's a sort of curved slash. So I think the scribe is indicating that these three words, they've got like a comma before them. So they're describing the eos, or maybe they're describing the feta. I think it's feka. And so the process, I'm not quite sure, but I got stuck on a very tricky vocabulary piece for Latin, which is that if you have the word delictore with an I after the L, it is talking about a crime. If you actually have an E and all the other letters can be pretty much the same. If you have delectos, for example, you're talking about someone who is well esteemed or even beloved. So we've seen actually at the beginning of some of the Latin letters delectum or something like that, saying, you're a well-esteemed person. So I mistranscribed that at one point in my chat with ChatGPT, and that led into this whole just, wild goose chase on thinking that maybe this was not about a crime, this phrase, but was instead about someone who's well esteemed, and it ballooned the amount of time that I was working on this. So this word is undoubtedly about some kind of crime, and I think that the meaning of it is the phrase overall, that on the occasion of some certain crime. And the word non lorem means a certain or a few, but then delectore is not plural. So the whole phrase is just so troublesome because occasionem can mean by reason of, like on occasion of, or it can mean like a pretext. So depending how you read this phrase, Violant could be asserting that she thinks it's a pretext, or she could be saying, just in vague terms, there was just some crime committed. I am leaning towards the second. I don't believe that Violant would go so far as to say that the officials have come up with some pretext to imprison these students. I think that at this point, Violant knows full well that if her will and Joanne's will has been ignored for 50 days, that the officials of Montpellier are not doing that just out of some kind of falsified charge. I think she's well aware of what she's doing here when she's asking for the extrication of these rapists from the justice system in Montpellier. And it really is icky, right? A reminder that when we're focusing on particular historical subjects that are really interesting, it doesn't mean that we are rooting for them all the time or that they're heroes. It just means that we are focusing on them, and a lot of what they do is something that we can praise or accord with some kind of positive value according to our own modern standards. And then other things they do according to our modern standards we would find morally reprehensible. So, one last thing to talk about with the snapshot that we're getting about this Montpellier sexual assault case. It seems as though there's action taking place about jurisdiction, that possibly the ecclesiastical authorities are starting to get involved more, and that's why we've got 2 Latin letters to the Bishop of Maguelone. And so maybe Violant is hoping, now that the ecclesiastical authorities are getting more involved, that she can maybe have the ecclesiastical authorities use their position to take over the case. Like maybe there's this possibility that, if we just switch jurisdictions, if we switch court systems and move from whatever is in Montpellier into the regional ecclesiastical system, then maybe my influence will work, and this son of my high up official will get released. I don't know. That's just my guess of what's going on. I'm not sure if the officials of Montpellier have agreed to hand over the accused rapists to the authorities of the Bishop of Maguelone, or whether the officials of Montpellier are resisting that and saying they're just going to stay in our jail. And I don't know the typical timeline of how long it takes to have a case like this adjudicated. It's been about 50 days, and so possibly this is typical, and possibly they're dragging their feet and they're just keeping them in jail and trying to figure out how they're going to get through this. And certainly if they proceed into some kind of trial, then it's going to escalate the situation. So it's possible that they've stayed in jail because the officials of Montpellier don't want to risk some kind of further escalation, so they're just keeping them in jail and not moving forward with things. But I think the really interesting takeaway here for me is that we have this pushback from the officials of Montpellier, and that if you are a high up person and you perpetrate a sexual assault, that in this particular time and place, you are not going to be immediately successful when you activate your influence network. And you're not going to have an immediate get out of jail free card. Who knows what happens further down the road, but to me, it's a pretty encouraging thing thinking about the justice system in medieval Montpellier in late 14th century, to see that there's been resistance to the powers that are pressuring those officials to just let them go. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I have done my job. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes and a long transcript of my ChatGPT conversation. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.